this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. We are continuing our series for those clinicians that are either considering expanding to group practice or in the early stages or wanting to expand even further, and answering their questions, learning more about their journey, and hopefully having a conversation that will be helpful to all of you out there that might be in a similar stage in practice. So our guest today is somebody that I am fortunate enough to have gotten to know well. We have done some consulting together. She is actually going to be joining us in Master Your CEO Mindset, which is so exciting. It has been so enjoyable to get to know her personally and professionally, and she's doing some great things. So this is a great opportunity to spotlight her, but to also speak on a topic that I think will be really helpful for all of you. So Irene Faioes, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Julia.
I have been trying to convince Irene to come on the show for a while now. She is definitely somebody who deserves to be recognized. So fill everybody listening in on your backstory and when you started your practice, and then a little bit about where you're at now in your expansion journey.
Right, sure. So let's see here. I started my practice, my private practice, all by myself back in 2009. I've been in the field for a while, did residential, did outpatient, you name it, crisis interventions, you name it. And then I decided, you know what, I want to go off on my own and be able to just, I don't know, explore and kind of spread my wings. And so in doing that, I've been very blessed where I have a beautiful network and lots of support from the community, you name it. And now here we are, and there's only so much of me going around, and I don't want to experience burnt out because I love what I do. And so I thought, okay, what if I was to kind of dip my toes in some who are like-minded, really take pride in their work and work with integrity. So now I'm here. I have a couple of folks under me and I'm loving it. Definitely trying my hardest to not let anxiety completely take over, but it's exciting. Now it's called All Family Wellness Counseling, LLC, and we really focus in on different populations who speak different languages and really try our hardest to respect their culture and provide the best themselves individually and also the families.
Wonderful. So tell us about what your early stages looked like in the expansion process. So when you made that decision that you wanted to go in the direction of a group and your hope was to avoid burnout. And I'm assuming that you probably had a lot of referrals and you wanted to obviously share that and build a team. So what did that look like in the early stages, and where are things at for you right now?
Sure. So I had no idea what in the world I was doing. I truly didn't. I have more of a clinical brain than a business brain, So I was grateful enough to find some support, such as SCORE, SCORE, and they have mentors, free mentors there. I was really lucky to find a mentor. First name is Yemi, and Yami really took me under her wing and really tried to make me think about it very strategically and organize myself in the business aspect. I really also wanted someone that can help with the clinical aspect of it all, more my language, but in trying to connect those two worlds. And that's how I met you, Julia.
Well, I think SCORE is such an underutilized resource. So I am so glad that you mentioned that. Anyone that I have connected with that has utilized them have all had such a great experience. And it's a free service, and you get linked, right, with a mentor and somebody that has some experience in the business world. And it's so nice to have that accessibility to someone who has kind of gone before us and done it successfully. And they may not necessarily be in the same field that we are or have the same degree that we do, but they can give a lot of that direction with regard to the business side of things that we as mental health professionals do not always have training in.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful because I feel really confident in the EHR program I have. I feel really confident in regards to the payroll piece now. Definitely just it all, and what's really required. We're in Rhode Island, so of course we need to go by Rhode Island laws and all that good stuff, and the accountant, and there's a lot of pieces to it. So thankfully, all of those have been put in place. I feel really good at all. Now it's more in regards to how much do I want to expand? What do I want that to look like? Do I want to stay contracted with folks? And also expectations. What are so there's a lot to do.
There is. And so I feel like we have been working together for a while now. And it sounds like you said you are well connected and you have a lot of support and resources. And so it's good to hear that you're at a place where you feel a lot more confident with some systems, with your accounting, with payroll, with onboarding. I mean, it sounds like you've successfully brought on some clinicians and started that expansion process. So it sounds like your main question and kind of the phase that you're in right now, you had said, how big do you ultimately want to grow? But a little bit more on kind of what direction you want to head. So employee versus contractor. And then from there, a little bit more about the steps when you're bringing someone on and those conversations around expectations. And when you say expectations, are you speaking about client numbers or beyond that?
Client numbers, everyone also has their preference and population. So even in regards to just how do you balance that, what is the community needs, what are the staff needs, and how is that together, where there's some really good connections being made.
Yeah.
I've my own anxiety. I've been very slow paced. So there's, for example, like one individual that I really want, and I can't wait for her to truly, hopefully she'll start, within 2 weeks now. But it took forever for me to decide, okay, because of licensing, because of insurance panels, and like how many other folks do I want to bring in or source out supervision. I think that my own anxiety at times, because I'm kind of like, I guess, a carpenter, measure twice, cut once kind of deal. Kind of, so yeah. So definitely just assisting me with that, like having someone as an employee, there's, thankfully we finally got the manual going, which is a work in progress, but payroll wise, you name it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's dig in. So I could see that our conversations when we were meeting were headed in this direction. And I so appreciate you being willing to come on here and share some of your experience and your process with everybody listening, because I do see a lot of potential benefits. So first and foremost, I want to commend you for the progress that you have made. You are somebody who definitely errs on the side of caution. We were joking about this on our last call, where you want to make sure you have a soft place to land. And it's not that you won't take the risk, but you're only going to take it if you feel feel like it's going to get you to a place that you can somewhat prepare for. And I can really appreciate that. And I think a lot of those listening can as well. So let's start with the big picture question. It sounded like you were starting with, how big do I want to grow? So a couple of factors to consider with that question, because it's going to be different for everyone. I think the big piece is, what is driving your decision to expand to a group in the first place? And that's going to be different for everyone. So let's say, for example, that one of your big driving forces is that you want to be able to provide more support to the community, that you are only one person, you can only see so many people, you're getting more referrals than you know what to do with, and you really want to expand that reach and how much you can help. And one of the ways you see being able to do that is to bring on other clinicians. Maybe you are somebody who really loves the process of supervising and consulting and guiding people. And so maybe you want to have more of a teaching practice. There could be a variety of different reasons. So I think what your direction and what is leading you to start is the first thing. So what would you say comes up for you with regard to that question?
I really think it's about, for me, quality care, individuals who are not, and trying much more clinically available to the community who really, there's not a lot of individuals here that speak Spanish, Portuguese, Cape Verdean Creole, and I would really like to be able to offer more services, especially to those population.
Wonderful. Okay. It absolutely makes sense. So accessible, quality mental health treatment that is provided in someone's language is so important. It's rare. You've identified a need. It's something that you're passionate about. So a lot of your growth is going to be based off of what you're finding out there in terms of clinicians. If you find somebody that's a good fit and is multilingual, able to speak multiple languages, you're going to be much more likely, I would assume, to consider them and bring them in for an interview and determine if they're appropriate for the practice. And so that's really important as a starting point. I would say secondarily, another thing to think about are, what are your income goals? So I know through our conversations, and you touched upon this, burnout is a real thing. And for a lot of us, we get to a point where the only way for us to increase the income that we're making in our private practice is to see more clients. And it's not always realistic. It's not always sustainable. And so a lot of times we'll consider group practice because it's a way to either level off our caseload, see a more reasonable amount of clients, but also still have some income generated within the practice. And so I think that that's also another thing to think about, is kind of simultaneously, what are those income goals and how many clients do you feel is reasonable for you to be seeing at this stage in your career? And what do you see down the line over the next 6 months, year, next few years? And all of that is a math equation. So a lot of that is about kind of those projections. And how many people would you need to hire in order to either transition some of your caseload to be able to serve those clients that are maybe on a waiting list? Obviously tracking those metrics of how many referrals you're getting on average per week, per month, and then plugging all of that in to determine where you would need to be in order to reach either the same salary that you're currently bringing in or where you would ultimately like to be. What are your thoughts with regard to that?
Definitely, it makes sense. It really does make sense. I have a feeling like I'm trying my hard to take out my calculator right now. I'll talk about a waiting list, so I do have a waiting list, and I respond, to their needs as soon as possible, as quickly as possible. But sometimes too, you kind of lose focus along the way. Like, I can try to build that wait list. I could try to, you know what I mean? But I guess I'm just trying to see how in the world, this be a successful experience.
Yes. Well, one of the things that, absolutely. So one of the things that you and I have spoken about in our meetings has been, me really encouraging you to identify some more administrative support. And it's one of those situations where you want it to be affordable. You also want to make sure that you find the right person. And so I think that that is really a key to help navigating that waiting list. Now, there are some practices who would discourage you against having a waiting list period. Ultimately, the ideal scenario is a client decides that they are ready for therapy. They reach out, they connect with somebody without having to leave a message. There's an appointment available, they get scheduled. Now, obviously, if you can make that happen, that's a beautiful thing, but that's not always realistic. And I have experienced in my own practice the benefits of hiring based on our waiting list. So we can very easily, and when I say we, I mean my administrative assistant, can very easily come up with pie charts and percentages and graphs that help me to identify what are the age ranges that are currently on our waiting list. How many are adults? How many are children? How many are couples? How many are seeking out family therapy? What is the insurance breakdown? So that also influences who I can hire in terms of what insurances they can get credentialed with. What's their availability? Do we have a lot of people that are looking for early morning appointments, or is everybody looking for afternoon or evening? So I find that extremely helpful, because now we're at a point where we only hire if we are confident that we can fill that caseload, and our administrative assistant is maintaining communication with them. So we really pride ourselves on ongoing communication. And fortunately, Brianna is able to do that, where she's going down the list at least once a month and in communication with these individuals, making sure that they're still looking for services and letting them know kind of what the updates are practice-wide. So, if we have somebody that we've identified that would be a good fit, they're in the credentialing process, we can give them an estimate. And so I think that really helps. You are going to be in a unique situation because, like you said, you identified a need in your community. There are not a lot of practitioners that speak the languages that a lot of clients are looking to receive therapy in. So with that being said, I could see you having clients that are on the waiting list and are committed to working with one of your therapists because they're going to have a hard time identifying a practitioner elsewhere. And so with that being said, I really feel like you have an advantage if you are able to find the right clinicians to work in your practice, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Of, the pie chart and all that good stuff. I like that.
And it's so easy with Google Sheets. So we maintain our waiting list on there, and we are able to very easily generate all of this data that really helps influence a lot of our decisions. So another piece of your question was around contractors versus employees. And I know that we have talked a little bit about this. We're definitely going to focus on it during one of our meetings in Master Your CEO Mindset. And the previous podcast episode, I talked a little bit about it too. So I'll give kind of a brief overview and then I'll send you some of the resources. But basically, a lot of it has to do with the type of practice that you envision. And I would say you're in Rhode Island, I'm in Massachusetts, similar laws, that we err on the side of caution when it comes to contractors for many reasons. Because even though it might be tempting at the beginning stages because we think less liability, maybe a little bit more responsibility on the part of the practitioner because they're independently licensed. We don't have to worry about the payroll tax and, a lot of the things like liability coverage and certain things that we may be required as an employer to provide. You don't have to. I would say that knowing you and the conversations that we've had and this vision that you have for your practice, it really does make sense for you to hire employees for several reasons. I think one of the main ones, for me personally, it really opened the pool as far as who I could hire and who was interested in working for my practice. I was much more likely to get clinicians that were looking for full-time employment. And for me, we invest a lot in our clinicians, and it sounds like you would too. I mean, you're going to be putting in energy and effort to acquire these clients. And once they're there, you want them to stay within your practice and stay with your clinicians and make sure that it's a good fit. And so with all that being said, we do have part-time clinicians, but we really encourage full-time. And the majority of our part-timers have transitioned to full-time because they dip their toes in and they see what we're all about and they like it enough to really stay and take that plunge. So with all that being said, I could see a very similar situation with your practice. And so you're just much less likely to get in trouble if they're employees, you're following the employment law in your state and making sure that you have those pieces in place. And I do think that it really provides opportunity for more of those clinicians that are also going to invest and hopefully appreciate what it is that you have to offer within your practice. What are your thoughts on that?
I was wondering in regards to, let's say, like your first employee, if you don't mind sharing, with your first employee, how did you go about doing this? Did you call your accountant and say, hey, how did you make this happen?
Yeah, such a great question. So my accountant is absolutely where I started, and I was very fortunate to have transitioned accountants and found somebody that worked with individuals that are both in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. She had worked with small businesses. She's the kind of person that if she doesn't know the answer, she's going to find the answer for you. And so she was able to really help me navigate that. And in addition to that, I also found a really good employment attorney. And that's who helped me with the initial paperwork that I have employees sign, the employee manual that we use, making sure that we had checked off all the boxes. So in Massachusetts, once you reach a certain point, there's workers' compensation that we had to have, there's paid family medical leave. So all of these things that I needed to make sure not only were in the manual, but that I was on the payroll end navigating properly. So accountant is the first point of contact for some guidance. And then from there, I would say a good employment attorney was really helpful with more of the logistics and paperwork.
Awesome. All right, I have some homework.
Then your other piece was kind of expectations and kind of starting people off on the right foot, it sounds like. So let's say you decide whether you want to do employee or contractor, you bring people on, and then you want to make sure that you're setting them up for success. Is that right?
Yep, you got it.
So from personal experience, I can tell you that when I first started in my expansion, I was so thrilled to find anybody that wanted to come and worked within my practice. And so there were times when I would bring on individuals that were former colleagues of mine. So we had had a previous relationship work-wise. And so I kind of learned the hard way that when we lead as someone in a business owner capacity with more of the emotion than what makes financial sense and what's best for the business, we can a lot of times land ourselves in a difficult situation. And so what I found was that I had done the math and I had an idea of part-time and how many clients that would equate to in order for it to be financially sustainable. So obviously we want to make sure that all the expenses are covered and that that clinician is generating a profit. So in our model, that's typically a certain client number. And for us, that was 10. And it was so much easier for me when that wasn't clear in the beginning and it wasn't written down and we weren't having regular conversations about it, for those that were working for me to say, you know what, I'm really having a tough time this month. My kids have been sick. I've had a lot more appointments. I'm feeling really burnt out with my full-time job, and maintaining 10 clients a week is just not doable. And then I was in a position of having to decide, well, I've done all this work to bring them on board. They're credentialed, they're oriented to the practice, they've got clients. So it's not ideal to say to them, this isn't going to work. And so I found myself kind of working with them to try to get them to where they needed to be. And I was leading more with kind of my heart and my emotions and my compassion and trying to be empathetic than I was when ultimately this is a business. And so what I did to change that was much more clear at the beginning, had candid conversations with people before bringing them on, had it in writing, provided rationale for why that was the number that we had selected, provided the backing. So if anybody questioned that or if it was ever an issue, I was always willing to share kind of what the breakdown looks like and give them a little bit more insight, because we can't expect that people that we hire are interested or necessarily even care about a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. They're working for you for a reason. And so I found myself kind of being willing to share some of that if someone was open, and just being really clear about the numbers and doing the math. So what comes up for you when I bring that up?
It's just your own personality, and really having to check in to see what are your growth areas, you know what I mean? Like, what are you good with? And because with me, at times the compassion piece takes over. We'll do anything to make this work, and you're giving me a lot to think about here. Like, how am I doing this, and how do I really have transparency? Here's the numbers, and can you really commit to this or not? And, and almost have like a safe word about the whole thing. Like, oh, we signed. And how do you do that in a nice, you know what I mean? And like, yeah, and really take, because I love the human aspect of all of it. It's a fine balance. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. So definitely, I like that idea of complete transparency with the numbers.
And in all reality, it's a math equation. And so it really takes the emotion out of it. And from what I've found, clinicians really appreciate that honesty. And it's not something, I'm not a numbers gal. That's not inherently natural for me. I have to work at it. I have to sit quiet, spreadsheet, calculator, and without any distractions, figure it out. And then once I have that data, and that's all it is, it's data that we use to inform our decisions, then when you share that, it's kind of irrefutable. Because when it's black and white and it's there on the screen, it takes the emotion out of it. And then you can always come from a place of compassion, but you even said it. Once you're clear on that number, crystal clear, and you now have it in writing, you're going into that job interview, or you're going into even writing that job post with that there. And so it's a screening tool. And if somebody is on a screening call with you, let's say they've applied to work for your practice, and you're having a conversation before you actually interview them, you're going to be really candid and say, so we do require 10 clients a week, for example, for part-time. Is that something that you feel is doable for you at this stage in your life? And they may not know. They might not have worked part-time, or maybe they think that it sounds okay, but then the reality of it is very different. And so I always have them meet with one of the clinicians on my team so that they can ask them candidly, what is it like to work here? How is it for you managing 10 clients when you have another full-time job? Or maybe getting perspective of somebody that's full-time. How do they navigate documentation? How do they transition from one job to the other? That's been game-changing, because we may think we have an idea, but I feel like the opportunity to speak to somebody beyond me that is actually in that situation and doing it is so important. So that could be an option too.
Beautiful option. So the way that it would go, is it almost like having like 2 interviews? Like, what is your, tell me everything.
Yes. So what I have learned, Irene, yes, I know you'll appreciate this, because we've had some of these conversations where we both pride ourselves in being good judges of character. And I get the sense that you feel like you have pretty good intuition about people. And I have been floored with what I have ultimately discovered about individuals that I thought I had a really good read on and that I knew. And when they come and work for you, it's a totally different ballgame. This is your practice. This is your reputation. And so that means something to you, and it may not necessarily mean as much to another person. So with all that being said, I have really, in time, spread out my hiring process, and it's a lot longer, and there's multiple steps to it. Whereas before, I might meet with somebody, I get a really good vibe. They seem like they know what they're doing. They've got the right, education, credentials, license. They're willing to work for us. We have a position for them, and that's that. Very different now. So yes, we always do a minimum of 2 interviews. So I'll usually do a screening phone call that's just me. And that is really just going to be making sure that all the basics are covered, that they read the job post right, that they are, everything that they said was legitimate, a little bit about the practice, and making sure that it makes sense to kind of take it to phase 2. And then usually at that point, depending on how that goes, they'll either meet with me in person, see the space. And obviously, meeting with somebody in person is very different than virtual or over the phone. And then I'll bring in another clinician from the practice. And there have even been times when I've done panel interviews. So let's say we've had multiple candidates at one time, and maybe we were only in a position to hire one. I have had that individual meet with multiple clinicians in the practice. Then they get to know each other. The clinicians come prepared with questions, and then they help me make the decision about who to go with.
Nice. I like. Yeah, thank you for
So
that.
it may seem like a lot of work. What I can tell you though, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, it is so much more time to hire the wrong person. Speaking from experience, when you bring on someone that is not the right fit for your practice, and you've done all this work on the front end to acclimate them to the practice, you're investing in them, you're credentialing, you're onboarding, you're training, they're on all of your technology, they meet the team, they're part of the meetings, and their caseload is full, for them to then have to either employment terminated, or maybe they start their own practice and transition out and it's less than the time frame that's ideal, that can be so much more costly than taking the time at the front end to really ensure they're the right fit before you bring them on. And then obviously we're checking references, we're doing a background check. We a lot of times will ask for a writing sample. So documentation has been a very big issue. I wouldn't say practice wide, but it's a very common topic in our consultation meetings and in team meetings, really making sure that medical necessity is factored in, that people are updating treatment plans, and that their notes are comprehensive and would pass an audit. And so we invest a lot of time training clinicians on that. And so I want to have an idea of what we're getting ourselves into. And so we just have them write a mock note following kind of the template so we can see where they're at and get an idea. So those are just a couple of things that we've implemented. And then the interview questions. So I'm happy to provide you with kind of a list of what we use, but even that has changed. We want to assess their boundaries. We want to assess how thorough their documentation is, but how quickly they get it completed. And then we also want to know how they are among a team. How do they utilize supervision? How do they handle feedback? So all of those things, we're not only asking them, but asking a lot of their references when we're checking them. Thoughts on all of that?
How you shared the tools. Thank you. Yeah, no, honestly, this has been awesome.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm very grateful.
Good. I'm
Yeah.
so glad.
But I love the fact that it's like, okay, all right, this is time for homework, this is time for the clinical work, I must say that that's one thing I'm still adjusting, because I'm one of those individual things I'll just check done, and it's, and I've noticed that that is not the way this goes. It's like you think you're kind of done, and then you need to revisit it.
No,
Yeah.
So I appreciate you saying that so much. I resonate wholeheartedly. I am a very similar personality type. I love that feeling of accomplishing things and checking boxes. But I do find that with private practice, and I would say group practice especially, or any scenario where you're managing people or dealing with other humans, there is always going to be this level of ambiguity. And, it's about communication and how things are heard and received and interpreted. And it's very hard to check those boxes because there will always be these things that come up. And that's why it's so important to have support. And that's why I'm such a proponent of this program. And I'm so glad you're going to be a part of it, because not only will you get the opportunity to hear from me and to hear from Sarah Rivera, which we both run very different practices, but I would say that they're both really thriving in their own ways. And not that we're perfect and not that we've done everything right, but we've learned so much. You all get to learn from our experiences. We're going to cover so much. But then on top of that, you're going to have a cohort of people that are at the exact same stage in practice as you, like-minded people, similar experiences, and you all have that ability to connect with each other and potentially form some of those relationships. And a lot of them are local. So I feel like there's also a benefit there to community. We are not meant to do anything, especially this work in isolation, and it really helps promote longevity and enables us to do good work for a longer period of time if we have the right people around us. So I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm so excited.
So any final thoughts?
Final thoughts?
I can't wait.
Honestly, this is like to be continued. I think that that's the important thing that I'm finally accepting. It's not this piece is done or that piece is done. It just feels like all of it is to be continued, and you think you got something down, you go back and you rewrite it. It's an interesting hokey pokey here, but
Well, one of the pieces that you're speaking to that is so important for people to keep in mind, and if you haven't been in our shoes, a lot of people don't get it. The road to success is very boring, right? When we finally reach a milestone, it's super exciting. But a lot of the behind the scenes stuff, it's not always fun. It's not always enjoyable. It's a lot of checking boxes. It's a lot of trying to feel our way around in the dark and, figure things out and thinking about tough questions and mulling it over and what makes the most sense for me. A lot of it's trial and error. So I really feel like you spotlighted that today, that you have perseverance, you have a vision, you have an idea of what you want. You haven't let anything stop you. You continue to move forward, which I really admire and is very inspiring. And you're going to get there and you're well on your way. I think that having, additional support and guidance will be good and hopefully give you that soft place to land so that you can continue to take those risks, but feel more comfortable doing so. So I am not going to touch that dial. I'm going to stay tuned. I really appreciate you coming on the show and trusting me to help you. And I'm excited to see where this leads.
Thank you.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.